And welcome back to Managing the Insider Threat, What Every Organization Should Know. Our next presentation is Best Practices and Controls for Mitigating Insider Threats. And our presenters are George Silowash and Alex Nicoll. Before I introduce our presenters, two quick reminders. For those of you on Twitter, be sure to follow @SEI News. And our hashtag for the day is Cert Insider Threat. Same deal with questions. Feel free to post questions to the question widget throughout the presentation, and we will address questions at the end of the presentation. And now we'll get started. So let me introduce George Silowash is a member of the technical staff in the Technical Solutions Division, and his specialties are digital forensics, information assurance, risk management. Alex Nicoll is the team lead in the Technical Solutions Department, and his specialties are information assurance and operating system design. Alex, George, good morning. Welcome. Stage is yours.
Good morning. As I said, my name is Alex Nicoll, and my co-presenter here is George Silowash. We'll just be talking a little bit today about how we develop the insider threat controls and the process by which we do the research, the process that we use to go vet the controls, and eventually the process we use to transition the controls out to the public. We will also be talking a little bit about what some of our particular controls, like our best practices guides, as well as specific examples of the controls that we've released recently that you can find on our website. So to start off, I'd like to talk a little bit about I'd like to talk a little bit about the process by which we go through our controls. Our controls are a long-standing tradition here at Cert, the idea being that we don't like posing a problem without having some form of solution. So to work on our solution, we start by doing a lot of background research. Background research involves going out and actually looking at our different cases. We look at the things that people have done, things that have been in the news, things that our partners have brought to us. We look at specific cases or what they've done, how they've done it, what kind of technical means they used, what kind of information that was involved in the insider threat incident. And we get a chance to kind of go through the motions of tracking the person from start, not just when they started actually performing the act, but what was their mental state before the act? What were they trying to accomplish, and what was the overall end goal? Were they trying to hurt a company? Were they trying to just steal information for own personal financial gain? Were they trying to get revenge for something, some perceived slight? The idea is that all of our technical controls are wonderful things, but computers really don't understand emotion. Computers don't understand intent. So we as the humans have to be able to provide that sort of understanding for it. Now, the computers themselves understand rules. And so one of the first things we try to accomplish when we're looking at entire cases is segmenting out the information that we're getting into sets of rules. What did the person do? How do we distinguish that behavior from normal behavior? And what are the sequences by which we go through? So to start off with, we'll start with the definition of an insider threat. And you can see on your screen what we use as our definition of insider threat, but essentially it's a current or former employee who has access to your organization's network, systems, and data, intellectual property. We'll even include things in filing cabinets, and has intentionally done something to harm the organization, to steal the information, something that has negatively affected the confidentiality, integrity, or availability of the organization's information or their information systems. Now, to start off with, I've already talked a little bit about our research process, but the empirical evidence thing is by far and away the most important to us. You can't really create effective controls unless you have an idea of what they've done and exactly how they went about doing it. Once we have that understanding, and that's where we work with our compatriots here in digital forensics and a number of other areas, as George will discuss a little bit later. But the idea is to understand exactly what happened, event by event, from the start of the insider threat all the way to the conclusion. But once we have that understanding of what happened, we have to come up with an idea of what it is we needed to do about it. So what can we do about the fact that somebody went to the filing cabinet and pulled out a whole bunch of papers and Xeroxed them? What can we do about the fact that a person sat down at a computer and deleted every file on it? And that is how we form our control hypotheses. The idea is, what is the action that we're trying to prevent, and what are the range of possible solutions for that action? Once we have an idea of what the range of possible solutions are, we start looking at what's the most probable method of dealing with it, and what's the hardest to circumvent for the bad guy. There's a lot of controls out there that unfortunately are ridiculously easy to circumvent, simply because they don't take advantage of a lot of the underlying controls that an application or an operating system provide. And they're not really founded in what we call a root of trust. We can't start from the hardware up and say, the hardware supports this, the operating system supports this, the applications support this, to create a comprehensive solution. So we look at the wide range of solutions and find out the deepest one we can find and use that as our hypothesis. This will hopefully identify and control that particular form of insider threat. Once we have that hypothesis, we create tests. We have a lab environment here. We create a lot of different types of scenarios in the lab environment. We implement a lot of different types of tests through different types of technologies. You'll find that in most of our reports, we tend to use open source technologies, but we do have a lot of other types of things in the lab as well that we try to vet all of our controls against. And once we have a functional control, we can reach the critical stage, which is what we call the control pilot. We don't like creating things in a vacuum. And one of the things we try to do is go out to our partners and our partner organizations and say, here is something that we've come up with. We think this is going to be a great detector for an insider threat, or we think this is going to be a great preventer for an insider threat. Because of that, we would like to have you, as an organization, put this in place and just let us know how it works. Does it find anything? Does it give you thousands of false positives? Does it give you thousands of false negatives? Does it tell you, or does it use huge amounts of system resources? Or is it the tiniest thing you've ever seen and you don't even know it's there? The idea is that we need to be able to test these things in the real world, not just in our laboratory environment, because while we can predict what a lot of people are going to do, only your systems administrators have the entertainment value of actually dealing with it on a daily basis. Once we get the feedback from our pilots, we do perform revisions to the control. We may send it out again to say, hey, here's some different changes we've made. Why don't you try it again and see if this makes it any better? And finally, as you've all seen on our website, we release it to the website, we can release it to our partner organizations, and essentially for the public to be able to use. So examples of controls that we've created in the past are found in our Common Sense Guide to Mitigating Insider Threat. At this point, I'd like to hand it over to Mr. George Silowash to talk a little bit about the Common Sense Guide and a couple of our specific controls.
Thank you, Alex. Morning, everybody. I'd like to today talk to you about the newest Common Sense Guide. It's the Common Sense Guide to Mitigating Insider Threats, the 4th version. This was recently released earlier this year, and I also like to talk a little about some technical controls that we've developed and are releasing over time that are available on our website. Excuse me. So, who does the Common Sense Guide apply to? Essentially, the Common Sense Guide applies to anybody within an organization. It affects a wide range of departments, a wide range of people across the organization. It involves information technology professionals, information security professionals, physical security, software engineering, data owners, human resources, essentially anybody across the organization. Some of the new features in version 4 of the Common Sense Guide include mappings to NIST 853. Many organizations are starting to use NIST 853 for information security, including the federal government. They've been on that for quite some time. But we also started mapping to ISO 27002 and Cert Resiliency Management Model, or Cert RMM. We've also included some quick wins and high-impact solutions. These are solutions that can be implemented within an organization today that require little effort or little budget. So these can have a big effect within the organization with a little bit of investment. And we also have a quick reference guide that we included. On your screen now, you'll see 16 of the best practices that you may be already familiar with. The new version of the guide has 19 best practices, and what we've done is we've gone through the Common Sense Guide, rewrote a lot of these, condensed some of them down because some of them are very closely related, and we included some new ones as well. So today I'd like to talk to you about the new best practices that we have. Practice number 9 is to define security agreements for cloud services. Cloud is starting to become a hot topic within organizations. Develop a formalized insider threat program. This really isn't a new one. This is more of an enhancement to our past control of developing an insider threat incident response type plan. We also included establishing a baseline of normal network device behavior, and be especially vigilant of emerging media or social media, and close the doors to unauthorized data exfiltration. And a little bit later today, we're going to talk about some of our data exfiltration controls that we've developed. So practice number 9, define explicit security agreements for any cloud services, especially access restrictions and monitoring capabilities. This comes down to essentially understanding the risk that cloud presents to your organization, as well as what type of assets you're going to be placing in the cloud. What are your assets? Are you just simply talking about data, or are you actually talking about virtual infrastructure, such as servers, routers, and virtual routers and switches and whatnot, and also your data that's going to be there? You need to choose a cloud service provider that meets the security of your organization and also protects that data to your specifications. Are they giving you access to logs that you need? What happens if an incident occurs? Will they work with you to resolve it? And what level of security do they have in place to protect your assets? So practice 16, this is developing an insider threat program. One of the key things with an insider threat program is that you need to work with legal counsel first off. You can't go into, you can't just assign a team, hey, be your insider, I need you to be an insider threat program. I need you to stand up this capability. It doesn't work that way, and you can get into some legal hot water doing so. So this requires involvement from individuals across the organization, and mainly because you're going to be collecting data from those individuals from across the organization and feeding it into your insider threat program. The key part about this control also is to share the information, share it with the insider threat team. Many times we've seen that organizations don't like to share. They have silos that they keep their information stored in, and they don't want to give it to anybody else. So you need to share the information with members of the insider threat team. This next slide actually shows you how an insider threat program may work within your organization. And as you'll see, the data is flowing upward from the many different collection points, such as physical security, your data owners, your legal department, HR. They may be able to provide data feeds to to the insider threat team. And then that all feeds up into your insider threat team, which is highlighted in that gray box there. You'll also notice that on this slide, there's 2 different colors of text. The actual blue text on the screen applies to federal government. These are the equivalent positions within the federal government. The one position that is very important here is the chair of the insider threat department, or the chair of the insider threat team. It's a C-level position. It can't not be delegated down to anybody else. This is very important because it shows that that individual has the authority to act within the organization, and they can collect that information from different departments within the organization. Number 17 is establish a baseline of normal network device behavior. This also gets back to knowing your assets. Does a server communicate with what set of workstations, and what is that expected traffic? Or is the server expected to be transmitting like doing a database replication at a certain hour, but it's not? Are you able to detect these things? Do you know what your normal device behavior is? And if you do, can you alert on anomalies? Logs. I always preach that you should store your logs for as long as possible, as long as legally required to do so, and as long as that your policies and procedures mandate that you do. So also work with your legal team to develop those policies and procedures for log storage. You may have regulations that your organization falls under that you just might not be aware of unless you work with legal counsel. Be especially vigilant regarding social media. Social media, it's here. It's probably here to stay for quite some time. Your users need to be trained on what they should and should not be posting to social media. Do they post secret or confidential information to social media sites, like current projects they're working on, details of those projects? They may be posting things onto like LinkedIn, Facebook, any of the big name social media sites. Train your employees on your social media policy. Tell them what they should and should not be doing. And this information can be used against your organization as a spear phishing attack, for example. And it may induce a malicious attack within your organization if you're not careful. Practice 19, close the doors to unauthorized data exfiltration. Again, this comes back to understanding your assets and knowing where all your exit points are for data. How many connections do you have to the internet? How many connections do you have to a trusted business partner? Are those being monitored? Your USB devices, are they locked down? Can an individual just plug a USB thumb drive into the local workstation or their laptop and copy data off of it? So you need to control your removable media. And another important thing that many organizations overlook is what I call the old school methods for data exfiltration. Printers, copiers, fax machines. These are all ways people can get data out of an organization. And in fact, in one of our cases on insider threat, one of the cases we've collected, an individual was a executive assistant for a C-level person within the company. And they were actually had access to that individual's email and were copying documents off, and they were also photocopying them, faxing them out, printing them. So they were using all of those methods. So it's something you need to be aware of. So today I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the technical controls that we've developed to help prevent data exfiltration within the organization. So one of the big problems with data exfiltration, in particular, allowing users access to internet resources such as web-based email, cloud services. You may have a policy against cloud services, but for example, like Google's G Drive or the Microsoft SkyDrive or Dropbox, you may be using, you may have a policy against using those. Do you have a method to enforce that? And do you really know if your users are actually not using that or not? Maybe somebody has a need to get a presentation or a proposal done, and they have to work on it from home. So they email it out or they upload it to one of those services, and then they work on it from home. So now you have that data sitting not only in the cloud, but probably on the user's home workstation as well. So being able to monitor these types of services can be important to an organization. Problem with that also is that the communications channel between the services is encrypted, so you have no idea really what is leaving the organization, and you have really no way of inspecting it. So the big, again, like I said before, the big problem here is it's a perfect exfiltration channel. It's encrypted, it appears normal, you can send many files to some of these services. And sometimes you might be actually using these services for your corporate mail. There are corporate solutions that a lot of third parties provide, but you also need to be aware of what data is going to that third party to. So what can be done to prevent this? Well, there's a number of ways you can do it. You can implement policies and procedures on how sensitive information is disseminated within your organization. Hopefully you have those already and have trained your employees on what is acceptable and what is not. You could also do full packet capture on the internet traffic and try to decipher what's going on. That's not really realistic, though. I mean, we don't have the time for that, and you probably don't have the storage capacity for it either. You can whitelist websites, block everything, and just whitelist what your company needs. That can be very difficult as well. Or you can block all webmail services. Sometimes that is possible within the company, but sometimes it can also hurt employee morale as well. and maybe you want to give an employee access to web-based email to stay in touch with their family during their lunch hour or whatever time is acceptable. Or you can just allow all internet traffic and keep your fingers crossed. But we know that's not going to work too well. So what Cert has done, we've developed a tech note and a solution that can monitor your encrypted web traffic and block attachments from leaving the organization that you find might contain sensitive information. The tech note is available on our website, on the Insider Threat portal. You can download a copy of it there. But I'll step through a little bit of it here today. So what we do is we proxy all of our internet access to the websites. We inspect encrypted communication sessions for sensitive documents. We block sensitive documents from leaving the organization, either through keywords within a document or tags that may be hidden within the document, or we just block all attachments. So as I said there before, these are the documents that you can, or methods that you can use to block. So I'll talk a little bit about our proxy server and our configuration and what we did here. It's essentially a man-in-the-middle type proxy. I'll go over man-in-the-middle proxy, or how a proxy server works at a high level here. So we have a user on the left-hand side of the screen that you'll see who's making a request to Google Gmail services. Well, that request is being funneled through the proxy server. The proxy server is then establishing a secure connection to Gmail services on the user's behalf. The user, meanwhile, has established a secure connection to the proxy server using the corporation's certificate. Meanwhile, the proxy server has established that same encrypted web channel with Gmail servers using Gmail certificate. Essentially, any traffic that's on the proxy server now is in a clear text, but the user is not aware of this. If they looked at the security certificate, they could tell that there might be something going on, but probably most users wouldn't bother to check the security certificate. They just see HTTPS and away we go. So the proxy server has 4 main components. We're using Ubuntu Linux 10.04 LTS. We're using Squid version 3.119. The version number for Squid there is important, as the latest release will not work within this current technical note. We are working to upgrade the tech note to include the latest version of both Ubuntu and Squid. We're also using CICAP server and Clam antivirus. So the client basically needs to be configured with the organization's trusted root certificate. This can be done using group policy. We assume the Windows environment in this tech note, so you can push that certificate out through there. This is just a little demo of how this is going to work. So here we have a user who is going to email a competitor. He wants to send out some attachments. He's going to maybe send out some sensitive business plans or presentations, something that's not publicly available. He clicks the Attach File button, which opens up your file dialog box here, and he sees business plans. He selects those for uploading. Here is the actual transaction taking place between the servers, between Google server and the individual user. This shows you all the traffic that occurs when you do this. We're interested in blocking all attachments in this demonstration, so we're just going to take a look at this real quick. Here, this is the actual link, so when you click on Attach File, this is what is occurring. So you're creating a post command to Gmail servers. This will have the attachment embedded in it. We're interested in blocking that attachment completely. So we're going to take a look at the URL in use here. In this case, it's https mail.google.com/mail/OTA ? And some random text after it. So we can create a rule or a regular expression or regex to block this on the proxy server. We create this rule and put it on the proxy, and attachment failed. Okay, that's great. The only problem with this is there's many different web services, and you have to create that rule for every web service out there, and it's just not really feasible. And it doesn't account for a scenario where a user copies sensitive text and pastes it into Gmail. Well, we'll get to that later, though. So what we did is we developed a method to detect sensitive keywords and documents that contain sensitive keywords, and they're treated as a virus. So what happens is, anytime a document has a sensitive phrase, for example here, we see for official use only, is translated into this string of hex here, which is a CLAM antivirus signature. The next one, this is just a sample tag we created that we can embed within a document, which equals this string of gibberish that will probably never appear by itself in any document. And if you take a look in Microsoft Word here under the document properties, we actually embedded that string of gibberish in the comments section on the right-hand side there, you'll see. So whenever the CLAM antivirus sees that, it will block that attachment from leaving. So that solution doesn't really account for somebody just copying and pasting text into Gmail. This solution here does. We're going to talk about plagiarism detection and data loss prevention. Basically, we're going to inspect all internet traffic going through the proxy server. Rather than looking for tags or keywords, we're going to look to see how similar a document is to a body of intellectual property. If a document meets a certain threshold, we can either alert on it or we can block it. Technical terms, this is called cosine similarity algorithms. It's also known as plagiarism detection. This is actually what many academic papers are checked for. Professors have software that can scan a paper looking for plagiarism. So rather than asking if a document contains cited work, if it was properly cited, we're asking, does all network traffic match anything in our repository of intellectual property? If it does, we're going to block it. If it doesn't, we're going to send it through. So basically, this is plagiarism detection using just like a paper. If a student were to submit a paper to a professor for grading, they're going to use a piece of software to check that against their sources or their cited sources or whatnot, or the internet, for example. If it does contain work that has been used before, hopefully they've properly cited it. If they have, okay, they might get the green light from the professor. If not, they might not get a good grade on that paper, or they might fail. So, in our solution, we actually take the network traffic, we compare it against a intellectual property body of knowledge. We have a server that houses all the documents you want to protect, and our server then checks the body of knowledge to see how similar that is to the traffic that's flowing through it. If it matches, it blocks it or just alerts on it. If there's no match or has a low match rate, it's permitted through. So in this solution, we're actually using the Squid Proxy Server, Apache Lucene, Apache Tika, and Greasy Spoon ICAP server. You might be familiar with Apache Lucene. It's actually used in IBM's Watson, which participated in Jeopardy against 2 contestants. So you might be familiar with it from there. Essentially what's happening is a user sending a webmail message. The proxy receives this message, and it forwards it to the Greasy Spoon ICAP server. Greasy Spoon ICAP server says, hey, Apache Lucene, I need you to check this for me. Lucene goes out and checks it, and it gives it a score. How closely does it match? If it matches, it sends a signal back to the proxy server, hey, block this, please. And it drops that traffic. Some of the shortcomings with this is it's tuning it can be very difficult. Some common words found in everyday text can very well trip this up. It also does not detect encodings other than ASCII or Unicode. It can be very processing intensive. And you also have another location of all your intellectual property that you must properly secure. So if somebody has access to the administrative access to the proxy server, but they shouldn't have access to a certain intellectual property set, then you need to put controls in place to prevent that. So some of our future work, we're actually working on creating an open source data loss prevention framework. This will hopefully help individuals create data loss prevention rules that can be used and easily implemented within an organization. I also like to take a look at tagging network traffic with usernames and other attribution information. How hard is it to actually attribute network traffic down to an individual user? That person trying to attribute to an individual user can be very difficult. You have to take a look at your DHCP server log, find out what machine that person's logged into, maybe look at the Windows event log. And by the time you've correlated all that information, it might be too late. So it would be nice to be able to inject in the actual packets on the network username, other attribution information. So we also like to take a look at improving our tagger tool. The tagger tool is the tool that we developed that will actually insert tags within documents that a non-sophisticated user won't be able to detect. And you can also create signatures for those tags to be blocked by our technical control that we discussed earlier here. So I'd like to turn it over to Alex here to talk about some of our upcoming control topics.
Thank you. In addition to the controls that George was just talking about, we try to look a little bit farther into the future to see what's next on the horizon. As recent events have suggested, the idea of two-man control or two-person control is sort of coming back around. We talked a lot about it in the 70s and 80s. It sort of fell out of favor in the 80s and 90s, and we're sort of coming back to it now. It's the idea of, can we really trust one person with all of the information, with all of the power? And if we can't, what do we do about it? Most operating systems today are focused around the idea of a single administrator or a group of administrators who have the power to do essentially everything they would want to do on the system. So can we integrate the idea of a two-person control into an operating system and essentially prevent a single administrator from becoming the rogue element which can exfiltrate large amounts of information, which can look at or which can destroy a large amount of information, essentially cause massive amounts of harm to whatever organization they're in. The downside is, why is operating systems or implementing two-man control in an operating system hard? Well, the idea behind an administrator in an operating system is that they have full control over the operating system. They want to be able to fix your problem, and they want to be able to fix your problem right now. You don't want to have to jump through 5 or 6 different hoops or 5 or 6 different layers to be able to actually do any particular administrative task because it's not effective, or it's not efficient, I'm sorry, and it may not be effective, particularly if the person who has a particular set of permissions is out of the office at the moment. In small organizations where you may only have 1 or 2 administrators, two-person control can often be very difficult to implement. So we are planning on taking a look at the idea of two-person control in common operating systems today, particularly Windows and Linux, and determining whether you can fragment the administrative role into discrete pieces. Can you create effective monitoring mechanisms to be able to enforce those particular roles and require essentially a second person's authentication to be able to release specific actions. So user creation, for instance, would require 2 administrators to agree that it needs to be done. Or to be able to create new websites, to be able to copy large amounts of data, to refactor your entire storage array. All those sorts of things need a little bit more control. Now, we are also looking at the idea of better forensics for insider threat indicators. We've been able to work with our forensics group for a long time to be able to identify what a particular person has done on a system. The problem is that not every type of operating system out there and not every application out there is as friendly as some of our others in terms of giving us the amount of data that we need to be able to start correlating actions. When did a person open a file? How long did they have that file open? What were the actions they took while they were in the file? We need to be able to create more effective forensics tools to be able to allow us to identify those sorts of things. So as an example, dwell time turns out to be a moderately important factor for identifying whether somebody's actually doing something to a file or whether they're just simply looking. But with dwell time, I mean when they open a file, how long do they have it open before they perform the first write or they close the file? If they open a large number of files, they have a very short dwell time for those files. Chances are they're just looking for something. And we can take that pattern and put it back into a set of behaviors that may be an indicator for risk. If we have the ability to understand when their first write is, what section perhaps of the file their first write is in, we can divine from what's in that section of the file what the intent of that change is. Were they really trying to just modify a document, update a report, something along those lines? Or are they systematically going through and changing that same thing everywhere? And if they are systematically changing that same thing everywhere, do we need to be worried about it? Is it something that's considered a critical piece of information for your organization? If they are opening large numbers of files on file shares that your organization may have, what are they looking for? If they're opening thousands of files and then suddenly stop and have a really, really long dwell time on one file, did they find what they were looking for? So the answer is, the idea is we need to create better forensics, real-time, essentially, forensics data so that we can take those behaviors and map them back into our existing controls and map them back into our research so we can have a much broader spectrum of things that we can look for, and we can give you a more comprehensive picture of what's really going on in your network. So I'd like to open it up now to any particular questions that you may have. So please, if you are submitting questions, feel free, and love to answer them.
Okay, George and Alex, excellent presentation. Thank you for that. Just a reminder to everyone, for those of you asking about slides and other resources, just click on the Materials tab, and you can download all that stuff today. Also, want to remind everyone about the survey widget. We'd love to get your feedback today, so even if you're staying for a presentation or two, please give us your feedback through the survey mechanism. So lots of great questions coming in during the presentation, guys. So we'll start off with one from Robert asking, would not FedRAMP apply to any proposed cloud solution? Are you familiar with that? Yeah. I should ask first. Yeah.
Yes.
FedRAMP? Okay.
FedRAMP does apply to all federal cloud solutions. And FedRAMP is currently working on a large number of different provisions to place into service level agreements with your cloud service provider to be able to provide specific levels of assurance. As the last time I engaged with the FedRAMP process, it was still a little bit in flux in terms of exactly what those provisions were. But as long as you are a federal government entity, the FedRAMP is a great way to start.
Okay, next one from Sari asking, what happens when people are going to encrypt the sensitive data and upload onto a public website? How does ClamAV stop this?
Good question. Actually, encrypting the data breaks many data loss prevention solutions, this one included. So if that individual has access to encryption tools, they can bypass the solution. However, you can also further lock down the workstation to prevent these tools from being installed or even executing on that workstation using application whitelisting and whatnot. So that's a way that you can prevent that from happening.
There are also some statistical analysis mechanisms that you can use to identify encrypted information. Most crypto systems do perform what we call sort of a distribution. The idea is a small change to the plain text creates a very large change to the ciphertext. And the ciphertext itself is essentially intended to be indistinguishable from random. So if you were just to grab a whole bunch of random bytes off your machine, the idea is if you compared the randomness of that to a ciphertext, it'd have about the same. A lot of the really good encryption algorithms do perform those or do have those types of parameters, which means that if you're doing statistical analysis on what's leaving your network, you'll see that text is very ordered, but the encrypted stuff is not. If you have just a very simple stream processor looking for essentially random things going out of the network, you have a very good chance of identifying when encryption is in use.
Okay, great. Next from Will asking, detecting and blocking PII such as social security numbers and credit card numbers is easy. But what about facts and figures on global warming or emissions? Setting alerts on data types like this will surely trigger large amounts of false positives. While these data types aren't necessarily considered to be sensitive by the masses, it is, however, considered sensitive data to various organizations that deal with environmental data. Any comments there?
Again, I think that's an absolutely true statement. Detecting specifically images that are leaving an organization is actually very hard. However, we are making some very good strides in the realm of data loss prevention, pattern matching. So we're using a lot of the same kinds of technologies that have been used in surveillance before to perform pattern matching against a set of attachments leaving an organization, particularly if we can identify that they are pictures. So for instance, you can create a set of primitives, simple types of images, maybe a circle, maybe your company logo. If you use things like Visio extensively, you could use some of the Visio symbols to create a library of very small images that are then compared against the much larger images that are leaving your organization. The idea is if you can apply that pattern matching mechanism to those images and you see any number of these smaller sub-images in the main image, you have a pretty good reason to suspect that somebody's trying to exfiltrate things that you really don't want them to. The same thing could be applied to global warming map data, for instance. If you look at, for instance, heat maps have a specific color pattern that are almost always followed. Being able to do a simple histogram of the data going out of the organization, of pictures going out of the organization, which shows spikes along the commonly used colors used in those heat maps, and you should be able to detect those as well. Really, it just kind of depends on how advanced the data loss prevention tool you're using is.
Okay, 2 more questions in the queue. First one from Dawn asking, will employees know if traffic is being inspected by a proxy server?
George?
Sure, yeah, that's a good question. They will know if they examine the certificate. The certificate from, for example, from Gmail is going to be signed by, in this case, Gmail, I believe, signs their own certificates, whereas a certificate that's issued by your organization will have it's a completely different signature. In our experience, or at least in my experience, individuals actually examining a security certificate, unless they're really sophisticated or advanced or actually trying to be malicious or whatnot, they're really not going to probably look at that certificate. Our solution, though, actually, we have also implemented a way that if an individual is accessing like their banking website, that's communication that you shouldn't be inspecting. It's private, sensitive information. It is possible using our solution to create an exemption from that traffic, so that that traffic actually isn't using the corporate CA, but is using the actual bank's CA. So.
Okay, I think we got another one for George here from Tim asking, under Practice 16 Share Bullet, how does one securely share sensitive or proprietary information with Cert? Overall, what data do you have on costs to establish or start up a formalized insider threat program?
Ooh, that's a tough one. It can be. It depends. I guess probably a lot on the size of the organization. It also is going to depend a lot on your risk. What are you looking to do with your program? What are you looking to protect? And how big your organization is. As far as actual numbers, I think that they're so in flux, mainly because given the different size of organizations that we've worked with and whatnot, it can vary greatly. So you can communicate with us, and we can try to work with you to develop an insider threat program. If you need to get in touch with us, I do use PGP. You can please feel free to contact me or Randy or Alex. We all, I believe, have keys out there that you can encrypt your information with and send it off to us.
I'd also like to add that if you would like to contact our leader for the Insider Threat Center, Randy Trezak, He can also work with you on a non-disclosure agreement so that we can also share with you a large amount of data that we've compiled over the years of how to create an insider threat program and what the common pitfalls of those programs are. And we are also working on, although it's not ready for release yet, a set of guidelines for creating an insider threat program and what all the individual steps are to do so.
And is there a formal process for how Cert deals with proprietary information with organizations?
We typically do use the same process a lot of corporations do in terms of signing in non-disclosure agreements. Specifically, all of our non-disclosure agreements that require data, that involve data, have specific handling caveats involved with them, so that we are required to handle the data in a very specific manner and not exceed the limitations placed on its use.
Okay, we got a couple more questions. Two more we're going to try to get through here quickly, folks. Just some great questions coming in from everybody. From Daniel asking, frequently we see best practices like audit account creation in order to hopefully detect rogue backdoor accounts. But what is lacking in some of the controls is a discussion of how. What techniques would be used to detect accounts that could be used as a backdoor entry into an enterprise by looking at audit logs?
So this can tie in across the organization. First off, you need to know, why is that account being created? If it's a new employee, hopefully they've been processed with the organization and the HR has done their due diligence and done the background investigations and whatnot, which then should trigger a help desk ticket to have that account created. And then you should also be able to correlate that help desk ticket with the actual account creation log. Now, for accounts that you may need, like for service accounts or one-offs, there should be a formal approval process in place within the organization to actually create those accounts. And you should be regularly auditing your logs and going back and saying, why was this account created? Going to the system owner and saying, what was the purpose of this account? Is fully a legitimate reason and fully a legitimate way to protect your system.
And in addition, every operating system has its own logging mechanisms for being able to detect when specific administrative actions happen. And when the operating system's capabilities are not complete with respect to auditing a particular event, there are often additional ways to do so. So as an example, Windows has the ability to simply turn on a value in the registry which will log any account creation or deletion events. In Linux, it's a little bit harder, but you can look at a number of different factors. So, for instance, you can look at your Etsy shadow file to see if additional lines have been added to the shadow file. If you're using a Kerberos server, you can easily log the events through the Kerberos server to do your authentication. If you're using an LDAP server, you can log LDAP transactions of specific types, and you can essentially log the object creation actions for your LDAP server to be able to review them for account creation.
Okay, one more before we let you off the hot seat from Edward asking, how important is it to your organization's ability to capture true source/destination address information from network flow data in your insider threat control environment?
I would argue not very. The source for us is very important. The source for us means where it's originating from within our organization and gives us an idea, it gives us an insight into who's trying to accomplish something so we can go dig a little bit deeper. In terms of the overall destination, however, we've often found that it really doesn't necessarily matter what the destination is. We just know that they're trying to exfiltrate a particular piece of information or they're trying to accomplish a specific action. And it's really that action that we're interested in with our controls, not the destination of the action. Now, our friends in law enforcement would beg to differ greatly. They would find that where it's going is of great importance to them. And so if you're looking at engaging law enforcement, I think finding that destination or trying to get as accurate information as you can about the destination is very important.
Okay, that's all our time for this session. Again, thanks, guys. Great presentation.